So Solomon Sir Jones was a church builder, a businessman, a newspaper editor, a community leader, and as the Kansas City Sun called him in 1917, a quote, mystifying wonder, a biblical encyclopedia, and a soul-stirring revivalist. For all these titles, however, Jones was never called a filmmaker. This began to change in 2009 when the Beinecke Rare Broken Manuscript Library at Yale University purchased 29 reels of 60mm film shot by Jones in the late 1920s. Jones's films are sold by Curry Ballard, a self-made historian in Oklahoma who acquired the reels along with Jones's projector and screen from an antiques dealer in the state. The films held by Yale were all made by Jones for public exhibition in churches, civic halls, and schools, all places that received Jones as a preacher and travel lecturer prepared to share distant local views with audiences. For today's talk, I want to place Jones and the films he made in the late 1920s in the number of contexts. Working in Oklahoma before statehood, Jones's career flourished, and he helped build many churches in the state. So though he established Muskogee as his home base, he was active across the state, running a weekly newspaper, the Baptist Informer, investing in real estate, and starting churches. In 1913, Jones welcomed Baptists from across the country for a convention in Muskogee. In 1915, Jones joined Richard H. Boyd, who founded and ran the National Baptist Publishing Board, in establishing a splinter organization from the National Baptist Convention, which they called the National Baptist Convention of America, making Jones effectively a national leader. By 1920, Jones was a controversial figure in some quarters, with one paper accusing him of being a worshiper of the almighty dollar. You'll note that they kind of apologized a week later after publishing this accusation. In 1921, Jones was the head of the Oklahoma Baptist, 65,000 in number, and he was nominated by his fellow Baptists to be the president of the National Baptist Convention of America. Although Jones lost the race, it furthered his national reputation, which proved necessary for the events that led to him becoming a filmmaker. And so for this part of the story, we need to turn to another successful Black entrepreneur, Sarah Breedlove, or as she was known by her many fans, Madam C.J. Walker. Walker's hair products and her use of multi-level direct marketing made her one of the richest Black women in the early 20th century. In 1919, Walker died, leaving the company to her daughter, Aaliyah, who sought to build the company standing among the Black elite, particularly ministers. Toward that end, Aaliyah launched a trip to the Holy Land contest, with Walker's customers using coupons supplied with the product to cast votes for their favored ministers. The contest was launched in 1923 and was widely advertised in the Black press. By the summer of 1924, Jones had survived many rounds of voting in order to secure third place, which included a free trip to Europe and the Middle East. And as we see from this flyer, Jones's Oklahoma congregation was very proud of their minister, who would be taking his first trip out of the United States. In this photo, we see Jones, now 55, outside Aaliyah's home in Harlem, a prominent salon during the Harlem Renaissance. And I think what's interesting about this photo is that if you look closely, you notice that Jones is carrying a satchel, which I believe to be his camera. The Bell & Howell Filmo camera, which Jones used, was one of the first entrants in the new field of 60mm filmmaking. This small gauge of 60mm was standardized by Kodak a year earlier, but Bell & Howell's model was the first with an automatic crank, making it particularly popular for people who are new to filmmaking. Well, Walker herself had long been interested in motion pictures, an interest she passed on to her daughter, who built a movie theater at the company's headquarters in Indianapolis in 1927. I've not uncovered any evidence that Jones himself was interested in film before 1924. So he bought this camera in late 1924 and immediately started filming as he prepared to go to Europe. But once Jones started filming, he became quite prolific. And so in these films, we get a glimpse of his tourist eye. And so these films are all from the tour that he and three other ministers took in Europe and the Middle East. And I think what's interesting here is that these are probably, almost definitely, some of the first amateur films taken by an African-American in Europe, and perhaps among the first films taken by a Black American in Europe and the Middle East period. So we see a very early kind of a glimpse of what it was like to be a tourist in this moment. So we get, in the interest of London, like interest in kind of technology and kind of moving trains. Here we see a kind of a street scene. Jones kind of interested in the everyday. And then finally, we see Jones's films in the Middle East. And I particularly love this kind of tourist trap of sorts in Galilee. So we see the souvenir store Nazareth selling photographs, films, moderate prices, of course. So Jones was in Europe for just 2 months, but the footage he captured there served sufficient to create a touring show. So when he returned to the United States, he used flyers like this one to advertise his films and lecture program, which allowed him to travel throughout the country, mostly the Midwest, kind of sharing his footage of the Middle East and of Europe. And I think what's interesting here is that Jones, at the same time that he was kind of touring film, also became a filmmaker interested in capturing the lives of the people he knew best, the Black people of Oklahoma. And we see in these films an effort to establish narratives of Black success and to document the accomplishment of Blacks in the state. And this particular footage comes from the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And these were also taken by Jones, but they were donated to Naomi Long Madgett, whose family was friends with the Jones family, and then she donated them to the MAC a couple years ago. And so what you'll notice in this kind of success story, we see, of course, at the first farm home, this kind of story of settlement, and then we see kind of a second farm home, and then in a couple of minutes, we'll see the kind of reason that the family became very wealthy. Later on, of course, you see the kind of their kind of other home that they were able to acquire kind of after the discovery of oil on the property. And Jones is kind of capturing this kind of period of kind of Black immigration to Oklahoma and an interest in kind of setting up Black communities that were independent from the kind of white power structures. So Jones is very instrumental in this kind of process. And I wanted to just share just a couple of maps of the places that Jones built. This is a project I worked on with some students of mine to use Yale's material and the kind of locations they give and to kind of put them on a map. So you get a sense of the places where Jones shot films. For the most part, I believe he was shooting films and also showing them at the same time. So he's kind of serving, kind of similar to other itinerant filmmakers of the period. So itinerant filmmakers who traveled around the country, making films, mostly in smaller communities, and allowing people to see themselves in the movies. So early itinerants were using kind of 35 millimeter, which was the film foot gauge that was used in theaters. And then later they started to use 60 millimeter. So Jones was among the first filmmakers to use 60 millimeter, in part because the technology was new. And if we drill in a bit closer, we see Oklahoma and what these towns were like here. And I think it's interesting to kind of put this map on top of this map of the all Black towns of Oklahoma. Again, these are communities that were established in the early 20th century. And as this map shows, many of these communities no longer exist. Either they're no longer incorporated or they've just essentially become kind of lost on the map in a sense. And so if we overlap, we get a sense of some kind of overlap where Jones was working. And then I was able to kind of use this map and go through Jones' footage. And you can see a number of communities that he at least identifies by title card in his title cards, places where he filmed. And so I want to close with a longer clip to kind of hit home kind of the way in which Jones was kind of using his films to not just kind of show people the here and now, but also with an eye toward history. So this is an optimistic headline from the Tulsa Star. You'll notice the date is late November 1920. And Jones was actually selected by the governor of Oklahoma to attend this interracial conference, which is designed to increase racial harmony in the state. And this conference, of course, took place about 6 months before the Tulsa Race Massacre that happened in late May, early June of 1921. And as we know, we're just now kind of coming to terms with the horrors of this event, which I think makes it all important that Jones took the time to document its aftermath. And so if we look at this footage here, so we start, Jones is documenting the Tulsa Business League. And again, this film is made in 1925. So this is about 4 years after the Tulsa Race Massacre. And Jones is, again, using film to not just kind of let people see themselves on the screen, which would have been an appeal unto itself, but also to kind of document this with an eye toward history. And I think we see this most explicitly in these scenes in which Jones is showing photographs of the kind of aftermath of the Tulsa race massacre, buildings that were destroyed, and then we'll see kind of also kind of footage of the recovery as well. And so I think one question, we have very little visual documentation of these events. I don't think very much at all, kind of moving image documentation. So the fact that Jones feels one way to kind of document these atrocities is to film photographs is really powerful. And you can see that these photographs, again, fairly large size from what we can tell, and just a way to kind of commemorate the destruction that happened. When Jones would have been showing these films, it would have almost always been accompanied with a lecture. So you can imagine him as a preacher and kind of demonstrating, discussing kind of what happened. And we see in this footage coming up, some of the ruins that are still kind of visible 4 years later. You notice too that these films are kind of carefully arranged and put into a particular program. I haven't been able to inspect the footage itself, but I imagine that these are edited reels. And so Jones is kind of using film as a lecturer, not just to kind of document what's there the way one would with like amateur film or home movies in particular, but to also make it something one can show. And we see in this footage some of kind of Tulsa's recovery. And I think this is equally important. So Jones is not only committed to documenting the kind of devastation caused by the riots, but also the kind of resiliency of the Black community afterward. And so we see local businesses. This is all in the Greenwood district, so very close to where the massacre took place. And then we'll close with a shot of the bottling works. And I think, again, seeing the way that Jones was able to link kind of Black religious life, business kind of work, and a kind of general commitment to Black uplift, I think is really powerful. And so seeing, again, these scenes of the C&B bottling company and kind of what would have been kind of symbols of kind of living evidence, visual evidence of Black prosperity in the 1920s. And I think just to kind of conclude, I think what's really important about these collections is that they give us so many clues into kind of what life was like in Oklahoma for Black people in this period. This is a period, again, many of these towns no longer exist. These communities don't have the same kind of shape that they do now, and often left very few other traces of their life. And so we have in this footage an opportunity, I think, to recover a lot of the Black experience. And I think it's very rich text to start with. So with that, I would be happy to entertain questions. If you would like to check out my essay on Jones films or other fantastic essays about race and what are called non-theatrical films, please check out this incredible Duke University Press book that was published last year called Screening Race in American Non-Theatrical Film. The QR code and the URL is there. And I look forward to taking your questions.